I was sitting 3 tables away, my hands curled tight around a glass of water I hadn't touched. The restaurant buzzed with laughter and clinking cutlery, but all I could hear was his voice, low, familiar, warm in a way it hadn't been with me for months before we broke up. He was leaning in close, smiling at the woman across from him, smiling at her the way he used to smile at me. His hand brushed hers. She laughed, tilting her head the way I used to when I thought he was the funniest man alive. And for a second, I couldn't breathe. It felt like I'd been erased from my own life and someone else had stepped into my place. His name is Marcus. For almost 4 years, I thought he was my future. We'd talked about buying a house, maybe even kids one day. I memorized his coffee order, knew the way he liked his shirts pressed, and forgave him for being late because he was working late. That's what love is, right? Believing. Except love also makes you blind. I ignored the signs, the phone calls that cut off when I walked into the room, the sudden work trips that came without details, the way he stopped reaching for me in bed and started keeping his phone face down on the nightstand. When he finally ended things, it wasn't with a bang. It was a quiet conversation, a sigh, a muttered, "It's not working anymore." He walked away with a shrug, like 4 years of my life were nothing but a pair of shoes he'd outgrown. And I told myself I'd move on, that I'd be fine. But watching him now, leaning toward her like she was the center of the universe, I felt the truth settle like a stone in my chest. I hadn't been replaced. I'd been erased. And I thought I'd moved on, until the night I saw him sitting across from me, smiling at her the way he used to smile at me. When I look back, the cracks weren't sudden. They spread slowly, like hairline fractures in glass you don't notice, until the whole window shatters. It started with little things. A shirt that came home smelling faintly of perfume he brushed off as from the office. A lipstick smudge on his collar one night when he claimed he'd been out with coworkers. I wanted to believe him, so I did. I told myself maybe it was nothing, maybe it was a trick of the light, maybe I was tired and seeing things. Then there was the receipt. I found it stuffed into his jeans while doing laundry. 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine at a restaurant we'd never been to together. When I asked, he chuckled, kissed my forehead, and said, "You're really going to interrogate me over dinner with a client?" He was so calm, so steady, that I felt ridiculous for even asking. But then came the phone. Always face down. Notifications silenced, the way he'd angle the screen away when I walked by. Once I reached for it when it buzzed, and he snatched it so fast it startled me. His explanation? "Work stuff. Confidential. Don't take it personally." Still, the unease grew. Nights he'd come home late, smelling of whiskey, muttering about late meetings. Weekends where he was suddenly busy, but couldn't explain with what. Every time I pushed, he flipped it back on me. "You're paranoid. You're imagining things. God, Elena, why can't you just trust me?" And that was the cruelest part. I started believing him. Maybe I was paranoid. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe grief from losing my mom, stress from work. Whatever excuse I could come up with was making me spiral. Some nights, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every late return, every glance at his phone. My chest would ache from trying to hold in the suspicion, but my mouth stayed shut. Because if I said it out loud, maybe I'd lose him. But silence didn't save me. It just ate me alive. And eventually, I realized I couldn't live in the dark anymore. I needed proof. The night I finally broke was a Thursday. He'd kissed my cheek on the way out, muttering about another late meeting. I watched his taillights disappear down the street, and something inside me snapped. I grabbed my keys and followed. Default techs, I stayed 2 cars behind, my palms slick on the steering wheel. He didn't head toward the office. He drove across town to a part of the city where the restaurants glittered with white tablecloths and glowing signs. My stomach dropped when he pulled into a valet line. I parked down the block and walked fast, my heart hammering in my ears. Through the window of a candlelit restaurant, I saw him, Marcus, sitting at a table, leaning in close to a woman I'd never seen before. She wasn't just anyone. She was polished, radiant, her hand resting comfortably on his as if it belonged there. And he looked at her, the way I'd prayed he'd look at me again. I wanted to believe it was just a fling, some meaningless date. But then I saw them stand as 2 of his friends walked over. He wrapped an arm around her waist, smiling with pride. "This is Hannah," I heard him say through the glass. "My girlfriend." Girlfriend. The word hit harder than any punch. My throat closed. My hands shook. Because in that moment, I understood the truth I'd been too afraid to name. I wasn't his girlfriend. I wasn't his partner. I was the secret. The woman he left at home while he built a shiny, presentable life with someone else. The stand-in when he needed comfort. The placeholder when no one else was looking. I staggered back from the window, the night air biting against my skin. My chest felt hollow, my stomach twisting until I thought I'd be sick. 4 years of my life, every dream I'd built, every sacrifice I'd made, it all crumbled under the weight of one brutal realization. I hadn't been cheated on. I had been erased. I wasn't his partner. I was his cover story. After that night, I went cold. Calls went unanswered. Texts ignored. I couldn't bring myself to look at him without seeing her face reflected in his eyes. But Marcus wasn't done with me. He showed up at my door 2 days later, looking every bit the man I used to love, hair tousled, sleeves rolled up, that soft half-smile he wore whenever he wanted forgiveness. "Elena," he sighed, leaning against the doorframe like this was all beneath him. "It's complicated." Complicated. That was his excuse. Not betrayal, not lies. Just a word meant to soften the blade. He swore he loved me. Swore Hannah didn't change that. Claimed he was working things out and just needed me to be patient. I almost laughed in his face. But the cruelest part? When I finally told friends and family the truth, they didn't believe me. He'd already spun the story, painting me as clingy, unstable, unwilling to accept the breakup. One friend even pulled me aside, whispering, "You have to let him move on." Let him move on? He'd been moved on long before he ever let me go. I felt erased from my own life, like the years we'd shared never existed, like I was a ghost haunting a story he'd rewritten without me. But ghosts can carry proof. So I started gathering mine. Screenshots of texts, saved voicemails, the receipt for that dinner for two he'd claimed was work. I even kept the photo of us he'd posted and then quietly deleted it once Hannah entered the picture. Piece by piece, I built a record of the life he wanted to pretend never happened. And as I watched him flaunt her on social media, smiling with the pride he used to save for me, something hardened in my chest. I wasn't just going to walk away, I was going to expose him. It didn't take long to find out where they'd be. Social media told me everything I needed to know. Hannah tagging the restaurant in her story, the table glittering with wine glasses, his hand resting proudly over hers. For hours, I sat at home with the folder of evidence spread across my kitchen table, screenshots, receipts, photos. My hands shook every time I picked them up. I wasn't built for scenes. I wasn't the kind of woman who stormed into rooms and demanded attention. But I also wasn't going to let him erase me. Not again. So I dressed in black, the kind of quiet armor that gave me courage, and walked into that restaurant like I belonged there. I spotted them instantly. Marcus, leaning in close, laughing too loudly. Hannah, radiant but tired in the eyes, as if she was trying to convince herself of the picture they painted together. When Marcus saw me approach, his face shifted. Panic, then calculation. By the time I reached their table, he was smiling like I was a stranger. "Can we help you?" he asked smoothly, his hand tightening around Hannah's. I pulled a folded paper from my bag and placed it on the table. "Maybe she can help me," I said, looking at Hannah. "Ask him why he bought 2 entrees at this restaurant a month before he ever introduced you. Ask him why his phone was blowing up with texts from me the night he told you he was working late." Hannah blinked, her face pale. Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. "She's obsessed. She can't let go." But I cut him off, my voice calm and steady. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here with proof." I slid my phone across the table, the screen lighting up with screenshots of his messages, his promises, the dates and times lined up with Hannah's. For a long moment, silence. Then Hannah picked up the phone, scrolling with trembling fingers. Finally, she looked at him, not me, and said, "I already suspected. I just didn't have the proof." And in that moment, I wasn't the crazy ex. I was the woman who had just pulled the mask off the man who thought he could keep us both in the dark. Hannah's voice was low but sharp. "How long, Marcus? How long have you been lying to me?" He stammered, reaching for her hand, but she pulled it away. For the first time, he looked rattled. His polished calm was slipping, cracks spiderwebbing across the mask he'd worn so easily. I should have felt satisfied, vindicated. But before I could even process it, the universe twisted the knife, because that's when she walked in. Another woman. Young, nervous, holding a clutch like it was a lifeline. She scanned the room until her eyes landed on Marcus, and her face lit up with recognition. "Marcus!" she called, weaving through the tables. Hannah and I turned at the same time. His face drained of color. The new woman reached the table, confusion spreading as she noticed us. "What's going on? You said you were working late." She stopped mid-sentence, staring at Hannah's hand still clutching my phone, the damning messages glowing on the screen. Silence hit the room like a tidal wave. Diners shifted in their seats, whispering. Hannah's jaw tightened. My pulse thundered in my ears, and then it all unraveled. Accusations flew. Hannah demanding answers, the other woman crying, Marcus sputtering half-excuses that collapsed before they left his mouth. The chaos grew so loud that the manager hovered nearby, ready to step in. But I wasn't humiliated anymore, because I saw it clearly. The shame I had carried wasn't mine alone. It belonged to all of us. We'd all been played, all erased, all shoved into the shadows while he juggled lies like cheap tricks. The humiliation was his now, and for the first time, the room turned on him, not me. I didn't wait for the rest of the argument to play out. I'd done what I came to do. While Marcus drowned in the wreckage of his own lies, I picked up my bag and walked out of the restaurant. The night air hit me like a wave, cold, sharp, alive. For weeks, I'd carried the weight of his betrayal like chains around my chest. Tonight, I set them down. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about humiliating him in front of strangers or even in front of Hannah. It was about reclaiming the story he tried to steal from me. Because for too long, he'd painted me as the jealous one, the unstable one, the problem he outgrew. He wanted me to be his secret, tucked away, unseen, erased. But secrets don't stay hidden forever. As I walked down the street, my heels clicking against the pavement, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Freedom. I knew people would keep whispering, spinning their own versions. That didn't matter anymore. The truth had landed where it needed to. Not in a courtroom, not in some grand speech. Just in the silence that followed when his mask shattered in front of everyone. He tried to make me his secret. Instead, I became his downfall. And sometimes, the loudest justice isn't in a courtroom. It's in the silence that follows when the truth finally lands